Today, I'm speaking with the investigative journalist Matt Kennard. He's worked for various media platforms like the Financial Times, The Guardian, The Intercept, and many others. He has since gone independent, working for himself and contributing to other platforms, co-founded Declassified UK, and he currently contributes to Palestine Deep Dive. He's also the author of the book, The Racket, which exposes the American political and economic elite engaging in racketeering all over the world. So, Matt, thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So, Matt, I wanted to speak to you about the important work you've done in tracking and exposing the flight logs of the United Kingdom's Royal Air Force intelligence gathering aircraft. You have tracked these planes, whether it's in the UK, carrying out what seems like these practice missions, and then you've tracked them as well in Cyprus, where the UK has a base, and you track these planes as they make their way to Gaza, and then they turn off their transponder, and it's assumed that they're going to Gaza and collecting intelligence, helping Israel violate the temporary ceasefire, for example, things of that nature. Can you walk us through the UK's direct involvement in supporting the IDF in this genocide in Gaza?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that this genocide, it's not reported like this, but this genocide is a tripartite genocide in that there's three main countries doing it. One, obviously, is Israel, who's getting it done, but the two others are the United States, as we know, which provides the overwhelming amount of weaponry, and Britain, which is the leader in intelligence support for Israel, providing intelligence. Now, this is a statistic that's not from me or from anything Declassified UK did, but Al Jazeera did some work following up on our work, and they did a long analysis of surveillance flights over Gaza, and they found that 47% of those were by the RAF, the Royal Air Force, so the British Air Force. That's more than double Israel itself. So it's a huge role that the British are playing. And in fact, it's quite bizarre in the UK because nearly all the focus is on arms, which the UK is not the main player in. That's the United States and Germany as well. But there's barely any talk about the intelligence role. So I've been covering this story now for nearly 2 years, and there's various different elements of it. The main element that we've found is these daily spy flights, which have gone over Gaza from December 2023, and in fact are going up till now. There was one yesterday. There was a brief 2-week pause or 3-week pause after Operation True Promise by Iran. But apart from that, they've been going nearly daily for 18 or 19 months. And these planes are in the sky over Gaza for 5 hours. They collect intelligence, which is being handed to Israel. That's not me saying it. This is the British government. When they announced these flights in December 2023, they said they're in support of Israel. The thing they didn't say was where they were going from, how long they were going to be in the sky, or what plane it was. That's what we've done the work on. But anyway, we're talking about thousands of hours of footage now over Gaza. Probably the best record we have of the genocide is held by the British government. And it also is important because if you are collecting intelligence over a territory which is being attacked in a genocidal way and war crimes are being committed, and giving that intelligence to the power that is committing those war crimes and carrying out that genocide, you are a participant. That's not me saying it. That's by law. You can't give intelligence to a power like that and then say, well, we're not involved. So it's very direct link with the British. The story we published yesterday is another element to it, which is again a direct role. So we found that Israeli Air Force planes, which have been active over Gaza at the time of war crimes, bombing of civilian infrastructure and apartment blocks, they have been landing in Britain under the Keir Starmer Labour government since they came into office. We found 9 different occasions these Israeli Air Force planes have landed at Brize Norton in Oxfordshire, which is the base that people might have heard about recently because it's where Palestine Action broke into and sprayed the paint. They've now been prescribed, or they're about to be prescribed, as a terrorist group for this, which is just so absurd. It's beyond words. But these planes that we're landing in are still obviously have access. Are called REAM air-to-air refueling vehicles, and what they do is they go over Gaza and refuel fighter jets, so F-35s, F-15s, F-16s that are bombing and killing kids. And those F-35s and F-15s and other fighter jets, they can be in the sky for a couple of hours, but the Israelis are just, as we know, have been bombarding and relentlessly destroying Gaza from the air. So these tankers are used to refuel so they can carry on for hours and hours and hours. And we located the tankers that have been landing in the UK over Gaza. So it's a direct link. What we don't know is what they were doing in the UK. I mentioned 9 separate occasions they've been here. 8 of those they were in the UK for 1 to 3 hours, which indicates that they were refueling. So the British were refueling them on their way to the United States and vice versa. So that's the intelligence support. There's also, which is not talked about at all. Last year, in June 2024, the New York Times did a rare bit of investigative journalism, which was good. And they revealed, based on an Israeli official who leaked to them, that the British had deployed a spy team inside Israel at the start of the genocide to assist their bombing of Gaza. And this Israeli official said to the New York Times that the British spy team gave value added to their intelligence operations and, quote, gives us intelligence we can't collect on our own. So that, again, is direct participation in genocide. You can't say you're not a participant if you're that involved directly in the bombing campaign. Again, zero of this has been published in the mainstream media in Britain, which is crazy in itself. But even the New York Times article I mentioned, that hasn't been picked up in one mainstream media newspaper in the whole of Britain since it was published over a year ago. So it's an Orwellian state of affairs when you have a government which is completely in bed with a genocidal power and participating in that genocide, and yet the media does not cover it at all. I'll just finish with another element, and there's more, but I don't want to bore your listeners. The other point is the UK Special Forces. Now, the UK Special Forces are the most secret arm or element of the British state. You can get zero information about the SAS. You know, people know about the SAS because of official leaks to the press, where they give it a nice image of this like a heroic unit that saves lives and blah 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 blah. It's heavily choreographed, the whole image of the SAS, but you can't get any information, independent information. But in October 2023, so a couple of weeks after the genocide started, there was a leak to the press here. I think an official leak, probably, because they thought it was, at that point, they thought it was a heroic mission, that the SAS had deployed to Cyprus for quote unquote Gaza operations. The day after that, the UK military sent out what's called a D notice, and it's a censorship notice that they send to all the media to say don't publish any information. Since that day, we've not had a single bit of information about what the SAS have been doing in Israel and potentially Gaza itself. And knowing what I do about the SAS and how they operate, it's likely that they've definitely had an advisory role in probably the ground operation, and may have been on the ground. Jeremy Corbyn asked a question in Parliament, says any UK personnel been on the ground in Gaza, and the UK government refused to say. So it's a whole a tapestry of direct complicity and participation, and we're still scratching the surface. And as I mentioned, the SAS were deployed to this base on Cyprus. Now, to give listeners a bit of background to this, Cyprus was a British colony until 1960 when they got independence, or so-called independence. But what that involved was the British retaining 3% of the island and turning that 3% into huge military installations and intelligence installations. And RAF at Racketeering is the major airbase. I've been there. It's a sprawling airbase. It goes on for as far as the eye can see. And that has become the international hub for supplying and supporting the genocide in Israel. So huge amounts of US military transport vehicles have been going from there to Israel carrying weapons. Huge amounts of military transport vehicles from the RAF have been going to Israel. We don't know what they were carrying still. And American planes go all the time. There was just one yesterday, a plane called a CN-235, which is known to be used by US Special Forces, flew from RAF at Racketeering to Israel. We don't know. We're not allowed to know anything about what Americans do on our bases, so we'll probably never find out what that was. But we're still scratching the surface. I've given you a brief outline, but this is all done by independent journalists. There's been no mainstream interest. There's been barely any parliamentary interest. There's been a few MPs that have asked questions, but Britain's role is outsized. And you realize this when you start looking into British foreign policy, that, you know, everyone thinks that the United States is the the global superpower, and yes, it is a US empire, but Britain never decommissioned its empire. What it merely did was stuck itself onto the American empire, and still provides a very, very important role in the whole imperial strategy. And in fact, one of the major functions that we serve for the United States is opening up our bases to America, and they operate as black sites for the Americans. So you can't get any information about American activities, as I mentioned. And RAF at Kratiri and the Kellier, which is the intelligence station, are joint US UK stations. They're not called that. And in fact, they're not public about the American presence at all. But RAF at Kratiri has 129 US airmen permanently located there. The Kellier in the east, we know, thanks to Edward Snowden, is half of it is paid for by the NSA, which is an American spy agency. So Cyprus is used by America and Britain to dominate, spy on, and bomb the Middle East, and now contribute in a very direct way to the genocide in Gaza.
Why would the UK be assisting Israel in this way? Does Israel need this extra intelligence? We know that they have all sorts of unmanned aerial aircraft. They have their own aircraft that are manned as well. They have satellites. Why would they need the UK to get involved? Is it something the UK is just simply choosing to get involved in because they see some kind of value in collecting this sort of intelligence? Are they profiting? Is Israel like leasing these flights out? What is the purpose for the UK's involvement?
Well, it's a very good question. It's a question I've been asking myself as well, because as you know, as everyone knows, Israel has complete domination and control of the Gaza Strip. What intelligence can the Brits get with these planes that they can't get by themselves? And I think it goes to it's more about the psyche. Well, there's two elements. One is the psyche of the British establishment, which is that there's a residue of the British Empire where the British establishment still want to feel like they're controlling the world and they're a superpower. You know, it's deeply, deeply ingrained in the elite in this country, and it starts in the private schools like Harrow and Eton and places. They ingrain in the kids that then become the prime minister or the defense minister that you own the world and you should be involved in dominating the world. So part of it is the British just want to be involved. And I think it serves a function for the Israelis as well, because they can say, well, it's an alliance, you know, because these flights were announced initially, and they can say, well, we got our partners. I don't think I don't think they need to be in the sky for any military or intelligence reasons. I don't. So I think it's just for show. And I think that it's a bit different with the SAS and the spy team, which were previously secret. I think that there are services that the SAS and the British intelligence can provide, which are kind of unique. Like we have a huge, like GCHQ, which is the major UK intelligence agency, which was exposed extensively by Snowden for the first time. Snowden said that they're more intrusive and lawless than the NSA. So there is a degree to which GCHQ and MI6 could be useful to Israel and the SAS too. But and the other point is at Kratiri is a 40-minute flight time, RF at Kratiri, from Israel. So in terms of the assets that the US and the UK have, it's one of the it's one of the closest, and it's huge and completely secretive. So as I say, the governance system in Cyprus itself, the British part of Cyprus, which is 3%, is absurd. It's run by all legislative and executive power resides in one man, usually a man. I think always has been a man, actually. And that person is appointed by the Ministry of Defence in London. You can't send Freedom of Information Act requests to that part of Britain. So it's a complete outlier, and that's perfect for a military and intelligence station which is dominating the Middle East. You want complete secrecy, not to protect us, but protect them from us. So I think that's I think that's the reason, and I don't think that's the craziest thing about it. You know, I think that if we had justice in our world, and if international law was applied, the ministers who ordered these flights, the ministers who ordered the SAS to get involved, should be prosecuted alongside Netanyahu, Gallant, and the US officials. So why open yourself up to that when you don't need to? But and I think the other point, sorry, I'll just finish with this. There is one other element, which is the Israel lobby. You know, Our government is, and it makes some people uncomfortable to say it, but if you look at the facts, it's true. Our government is run in a lot of ways in the interest of Israel above the UK. So this became very clear when 3 UK veterans were killed. You know, when they killed the World Central Kitchen, that massacre where they targeted the cars twice, and it was a targeted assassination. 3 UK personnel were killed. They were former veterans. There was a spy plane in the sky at that time, and the UK government has refused to release that footage, even though that's their own people, and the families of those people killed have demanded it, but they haven't been able to get it. So when you and also that it's a really mealy mouthed response to that, and what it showed was really actually the UK government is not representing us at all, even when we're killed by this genocidal power. They're more concerned with not upsetting this genocidal settler colony. It's absurd, but I think that's a major part of it as well. I think that our Ministry of Defence is not being run in the interests of Britain. So if Israel says we want these spy planes going over, we're like, okay, fine, we'll do it. And you see that again and again, and it's not just the genocide in Gaza, it's also the activism against it, which is huge in the UK. You know, we're kind of unique in the world. I'm proud of that we've had the biggest demonstrations, the most frequent. We have one of the most amazing direct action groups in the world, in Palestine Action, who are trying to stop the genocide, and they've just been prescribed as a terrorist group. Now that's unheard of. That's unprecedented in Britain. The Terrorism Act of 2000 has never been used to target a direct action group. And why are they doing that first with Palestine Action? They didn't even do it with Extinction Rebellion, who were causing damage and upsetting the public in their actions. The reason they have gone after Palestine Action in this way is because there's been years of the Israel lobby trying to get them prescribed. And they have much more of a constituency within the British state than even British citizens, I think. So I think that's why. But it has shocked me that they've continued, you know, as it's become more and more obvious. I mean, we saw it straight away what the goal of the Israelis were. There was no adherence to international law, and Netanyahu was quoted in a subsequent article in the Israeli press as saying, his general came to him and said, we've done 500 strikes or something. He said, that's not enough, do more. And he said, we don't have targets. He said, I don't care about targets, just hit them. So that was the philosophy from the start. And nothing that they've done, nothing, because I don't know how it could be worse, you know, when you're shooting people at so-called aid sites who come in, starving people who are trying to get, nothing has stopped British participation. Nothing, apart from the Iranians. That's the interesting thing. So I track these flights and you can see them, they turn their transponder off over the sea, so you can't see what they do over Gaza. But the only time I've seen a 2-week break in the last 18 months was when Iran launched its retaliation against Israel, and that grounded them. And that was the first time that British participation in the genocide had been stopped. So again, it's even more reason to think that Iran's retaliation was in line with international law, because it was also in line with the Geneva Convention.
So speaking of the Iran attack on Israel in response to Israel's surprise war on that started on June 13th. Do you know if the UK was involved in assisting Israel in intercepting projectiles coming from Iran, whether it's a drone or a missile? And you mentioned these aerial refuelers. Is it possible that British refuelers were assisting Israel in keeping their jets in the sky? Because the distance to Iran is actually quite great. There's been debate over how Israel's Air Force carried out their strikes on Iran. They had these consistent waves of like 30 to 60 fighter jets at one time dropping projectiles on Iran. The only way to do that is if the F-35 is given these external drop fuel tanks to extend their range. The alternative, of course, is the aerial refuelers, but Israel is limited because they only have like 13 of them or 14 of them. And so the belief or the assumption was that the US or the UK was assisting. So to your knowledge, Is there any evidence or information suggesting that the UK was involved in defending Israel and helping them carry out their offensive attacks on Iran?
Well, the UK government was very at pains to say that they weren't involved, because I think, and I don't, there isn't evidence for them being involved in the Israeli strikes. They said, and I think there's a reason for that, is that they were involved in defending Israel previously in the previous True Promise, but Iran said early on, we will retaliate against people who join the Israelis in their attack, which is again in line with international law, and they eventually did bomb Al Udeid base in Qatar, the US base there. I think the UK government were basically just like, we don't want to risk being hit by Iran, because again, if they had used RAF racketeering, they may have done it secretly, because you realize when you start looking into it, all these militaries and intelligence agencies are completely intertwined, and they all operate in secret. So what we're being told is often completely opposite to what's being done, but publicly, and I haven't seen any evidence that they were involved in the Israeli strike.
Because there was evidence that they were training together, and I know they train together quite often. As you said, they are intertwined, but there was evidence, and this is reported by Times of Israel, there were American refuelers training alongside the UK's Air Force and the Israeli Air Force, and they were flying F-35s, F-15s, I think F-22s, all sorts of fighter jets, and it seemed like it was perhaps a training exercise for this potential attack on Iran. But it makes sense that maybe the UK would assist in training, but not necessarily carry out the attack themselves.
There were refuelers around at the time, UK ones going from racketeering, but and it's hard to know what they were for, because we don't know. But people, sort of UK military people online were saying that they were for what was called Operation Shada, which is the UK operation against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. But that didn't make much sense to me, because partly because the UK government announced late last year that it was winding that down, and secondly, ISIS are now in power in Syria, so I don't really understand what that was about. But again, we don't know, and it's impossible to get information. We don't have a media which covers it. Interestingly, on the spy flights angle, right? So at one point it became an issue kind of after the World Central Kitchen massacre, and it was quite interesting how the UK military played the media on that. So they had never said whether they would give the information to the ICC, right? And then when they went public and started leaking stuff to the press or releasing statements to the press, it was all framed as, we have decided we will now give this information to the ICC if they ask, which was very clever, because it made them seem like humanitarian flights then. But in reality, how absurd is it to say, well, we're going to hand it to the ICC, the same information we've been handing to the power that is committing those war crimes? So it was a very good or clever PR strategy. But I think with Iran, the UK, as you know, Keir Starmer has said that he said they weren't involved, but he said they wouldn't rule it out. So again, it goes back to who's running UK foreign policy. It's clearly not the elected representatives. It's people in the background. And the other point is, it's not just Israel, because this is something for Americans that you might not understand, because UK politics is boring and irrelevant largely, but our whole foreign policy is written in Washington. We literally follow the Washington line, and that's not just Tory, that's Labour as well. In fact, it's just ingrained in the DNA of the British state. And during the genocide, the Labour government would literally change its lines on certain topics the next day after the Biden administration said something or the Trump administration said something. So with Iran, the attack on Iran, which was illegal under international law, is a violation of the UN Charter. Keir Starmer, who's meant to be a human rights lawyer, started out as a human rights lawyer. He came out and defended it straight away, and that was because Trump backed it, and he backed the Trump strikes. Just absurd things to say, but completely in keeping with the fact that we have a captive state in this country. We have a captive state that is run by lobby groups and foreign powers, effectively. And I'll finish with this. Another good example of this is like we have an occupation in this country of US troops. We got over 12,000 US troops in this country across 11 RAF, so-called RAF bases. They're not RAF bases. Plus, we have 150 US NATO troops. Can you have an independent foreign policy if you have that degree of penetration and occupation of your country by the armed forces of a foreign country? And it's not just the armed forces. Intelligence. Snowden's leaks showed that GCHQ, its site in Cornwall, is half of it is paid for by the NSA as well. And the NSA have huge amounts of people. We don't know how many people because they won't tell us, but the NSA effectively runs GCHQ. So I think it's kind of a conceptual mistake to think of these powers as different entities. They're completely intertwined in the infrastructure of them. It comprises, in some ways, one body with different arms. And that also goes for the Israelis as well. And that's why it's so difficult for the British government to do anything about it. Partly because they're captured, but it is also because this is such a deeply ingrained framework that if you stop being part of it, you mess up the whole thing. And basically, it's a straitjacket. You can't get out of it. The only thing during nearly two years of this most horrific event that we've been watching, this genocide, the only time the UK government, Labour or Tory, has done anything is in September 2024, is when they suspended 29 arms licenses. And they wouldn't even say what those arms licenses were. And my hunch is they did a deal with the Israelis. They said, we have to do something, but tell us how we can do it without it impacting on your war machine. But an example of what I'm talking about it all being intertwined, is the F-35 program. So we produce 15% of the F-35, which is being used to pummel Gaza and countless other countries in the Middle East. Now, they carved that out of the suspensions. So they said that the global pool, the F-35 global program and the spare parts pool is too important for the UK to stop contributing to it. So their lawyers evaluated that any weapons that go to Israel could be used in Gaza could be used to violate international humanitarian law. So they've accepted that, but they said we're still going to send the parts for the main bit of technology that's getting it done, which is just absurd, but shows that you're in a straitjacket. It's an American empire with its different little colonies, one of which is the United States. I'm sorry, one of which is the United Kingdom, one of which is Israel. Now, how far Israel is running its colonial master is a different question, but and there's a lot of chatter about this now, and it's a difficult one to kind of understand because we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. But what it seems on the surface is that the US political system has been captured by Israel. There's a very famous book by Mearsheimer and Waltz called The Israel Lobby, where they make this argument, which is against the other argument, which is that it serves a geopolitical function for the US empire, Israel. They say actually it doesn't, and they're realists. They say we need to stop, we need to let it hang out to dry, and the reason we can't is because they've captured our political system. I used to be more of the geopolitical outpost school of thought, but these days I'm more of the Mearsheimer school of thought, because you just see how the American political class, Democrat and Republican, it's impossible for them to make decisions that are against Israel's interests. And it's uncomfortable for some because it does feed into some anti-Semitic tropes. But when the facts lead you somewhere, you've got to go there. And it does, and it's the lobby's fault. And part of the reason I think that they've managed to accrue so much power is because of the I wouldn't say cowardice, but reticence to talk about it from some parts of the left, because they don't want to feed into anti-Semitic tropes, and they've been allowed to develop this huge infrastructure to the point where Thomas Massey, the congressman, said to Tucker Carlson that every single American lawmaker has a AIPAC minder. Which is absurd. You can't run any kind of system calling itself a democracy when you have that level of foreign interference. And it's not just that. It's not just the lobby groups either. It's also the whole other infrastructure around anti-Semitism. So, like the Anti-Defamation League, which presents itself as a body which fights anti-Semitism, but is in reality an Israel lobby group. So there's which is a huge problem as well, and we have it the same in the UK. there's a group called Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which I would agree with in theory, and so would most people. That campaigning against racism of any kind is a good thing, but it's not about anti-Semitism. It's about destroying anyone who speaks up for Palestine, who speaks up against the genocide. And unfortunately, that group CAA that I mentioned, one of the main bodies that have been pushing for Palestine action to be prescribed. So there's a whole infrastructure, there's a whole ecosystem of lobbying, of control, which is exerted on our political system that needs to be exposed. And I'll finish with one little story, which was, there's a Tory minister, right? He was foreign minister for Latin America and Europe from 2016 to 2019. So he's a conservative guy, close to all that Gulf dictators. He left in 2019 politics and wrote these diaries. And he said in those diaries, this is a quote, that the UK Foreign Office is run by Israel. And it wasn't covered in one mainstream newspaper. And this is a guy who's like a conservative, he's a Tory. And I think that when you have former ministers saying this stuff, you need to pay attention and ask yourself, how did it come to this? And also, how can we dismantle it? Because it's an outrage that not only are we, due to this undue influence, supporting a genocide, supporting an apartheid state, we're also locking up our own people on behalf of this lobby group. We're also destroying careers of people like Bob Villan or Kneecap. The list is endless of people who have been destroyed because of this lobby in Britain. And it also happens in the United States. So I feel like after 2 years of genocide, people are braver now, and people are less scared to speak out and less worried about being smeared because they know it's inevitable. But really, look, if you look at the bravery of the people in Palestine and you look at what they're having to put up with, anything we have to put up with just speaking the facts is nothing compared. So we have a responsibility to do it and a responsibility to speak the truth.
Absolutely. That's very well said. And, it seems like you've probably seen this mentioned all around social media, but in the last 2 years, people have said October 7th didn't just expose the occupation of Palestine, but the occupation of the Western world politically, right? And I've always shared with people that because I make the same argument. I think, our foreign policy, whether it's in the US or the UK, is completely captured by the Zionists. I think they control the foreign policy. And it's just obvious. I mean, like you mentioned Mearsheimer's book, they called this out as far back as like 2006. I mean, it's been known for many, many decades now, but it's abundantly clear after October 7th. And people argue that Israel somehow fits in the US's interests, and you can definitely make that argument. There's no doubt. But one of the things they point to is, look, it isn't just the political influence of the Israel lobby. You still have these institutions that ultimately ensure that the ship of empire is moving in the right direction and it will always serve America's interest. The problem is those institutions are made up of people. And those people, when you look at them, they are often either Zionist Jews or Zionists like Christian evangelical war hawks, neocons. So, but they're Zionists at the end of the day. And you look at the last few administrations, and I think Biden's administration was like 67 out of 100 people in the administration were Zionist Jews. So, there is obviously this concern of anti-Semitism, but we also have to call a spade and just recognize what's happening. And I think people see it now. And to your point, they're gaining bravery and confidence because of what we're seeing take place in Gaza. It's unnatural to see such things. And another thing I wanted to point out is, if Israel I really don't think Israel's in America's interest, because when you see how America divides and conquers, the Sunni versus Shia in the region, they don't need Israel to divide and conquer the region. There are plenty of people who will step up.
I always say. This is that's what I always say, because people say, well, they need it to dominate the Middle East. They own Egypt. Sisi's a client dictator. They own every single Gulf state. They own Jordan. Like they don't need this smaller than Wales, Israel. If they had, so I think it's changed, because the whole nightmare started where I'm sitting in London, not actually in this room, I hope. But the Balfour Declaration was 1917 was when the British government, which was soon to have it as a mandate, said we will give Palestine away to the Zionist movement. Now, one of the British governor of Jerusalem was asked in the 1930s why Britain was supporting the Zionist movement, and this is before Israel was created. And he said, "What we want is a little Jewish Ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism." So Ulster is Northern Ireland. So I think then why the British establishment, which was heavily anti-Semitic itself, by the way, back then, it's not anymore, but it was back then. But part of it was that's what they wanted. They wanted that back then there was more of a chance of the Middle East getting out of control, you know, with all the different currents, and it was in the context of the Cold War. You know, they needed this little outpost, or at least it would be beneficial. I think that's why the imperial forces, obviously Britain was in control at that point, supported it. But I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it has changed. I think that paradigm did exist, but people don't understand that some people don't understand that it's changed, that the geopolitics have changed, and the reason for the support has changed. And it's now the lobby. And another example, which is clear, is like in 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon and smashed up Lebanon, Margaret Thatcher in the UK and Ronald Reagan in the US imposed an arms embargo on Israel. That's to horrific right-wing leaders. That's unthinkable now by anyone, any party, any prime minister, whether Labour, Tory, Republican, Democrat. And that's not because in 1982 it didn't serve the same function. It's just because the lobby has been working non-stop for 40 years to make sure that kind of decision can't be made. And there's a famous meeting between Netanyahu and Bill Clinton when Bill Clinton was president. Apparently Bill Clinton came out and said, "We're meant to be the superpower here." Like, he was being talked to by Netanyahu, like he was the supplicant of Netanyahu. And, you know, there's also that video, I don't know if you've seen it, of Netanyahu speaking, he thinks privately to that family. And he's like, "We know how to play the Americans. We can always get them to do what we want." And he's smart.
Yeah, they can be easily moved.
Exactly. And if you look at what they did with Iran, how he got Trump to bomb Iran, like, that was clear maneuverings. Obviously, they launched an unprovoked attack and then just started pushing the Trump administration to bomb the nuclear sites. So that I mean, it's not even clever. It's so crystal clear. But Trump was moved easily, and probably thought he was doing it in his own off his own volition. I don't know. You can't get inside his head, but I think that the situation has changed, and I think that it is, as you say, it's captured. And as I say, that's not another piece of evidence for that is the domestic repression, which has been done on behalf of this lobby. But and obviously that serves no imperial function for our elites. But you're talking about like Turkish students or like residents in the US getting hauled off the street by ICE for writing an article in a student newspaper. You're talking about prescribing a direct action group as a terrorist organization in the UK. Unprecedented violations of our rights to protect Israel, essentially, and not even essentially. Yeah, essentially, that is what it is. It's not about.
Yeah, and those are people. Those are people here on student visas. You have American citizens born here protesting on campus, and they'll get beat to a pulp by the police, and that never happened for any other movement. Like, when I was a divestment activist in college, there were many other divestment movements. Like in Colombia, for example, when they called to divest from fossil fuels, they got what they wanted almost instantly, and they had to, escalate a little bit, engage in like occupying the library but they only did so for a couple of hours, and the university administration was like, okay, we agree. And they divested from fossil fuels, private prisons. There have been many divestment movements, and none of them had to ever escalate to the point that this has had to in the context of Palestine. And they were never, ever faced with violence. So you're absolutely right to point out, like, this isn't normal, and it doesn't serve the elite in any way. This is obviously serving the interests of Israel. And we've seen, like, on UCLA campus, where you have Zionist Jews who don't even go to UCLA come onto the campus and beat up students on camera in front of the police, and nothing is done to them. It's an unbelievable level of privilege. It's almost like it doesn't even matter if they're American citizens themselves. They could be like Israeli French citizens, but they're in America engaging in the violence, and America won't touch them just because they're from Israel or they're Jewish. It's an unbelievable level of privilege and control.
Well, I've got an example the unprecedented policing of protests from last week. So I went to Palestine Action, for listeners in the States, like they've been doing. I think they're the heroes of our movement against the genocide in the West. Anyway, for trying to stop the genocide. They've been for years trying to shut down and successfully have shut down some factories of Elbit, which is the major Israeli weapons company. They recently went into RAF Bryce Norton, which is the main UK airbase, and sprayed some paint on some planes. But the government's prescribing them as under the Terrorism Act, as I mentioned. And there was a demonstration in Trafalgar Square last week. I could not believe. I've never seen it. I actually haven't seen this level of policing before. It wasn't that big a demo. It was maybe, I don't know, 1,000 people, but there was so many police, and it was clear that one of them pushed an old man over in front of me who wanted to go to the toilet. They kept coming into the crowd, grabbing people, and there's video of one punching an activist in the face, a protester in the face. They'd obviously got orders to rough up the protest. And the day before, the Met Police Commissioner, who's the main guy in the Met Police, released a statement on Twitter where or to the media where he said, "I'm shocked that Palestine Action, there's this demonstration for Palestine Action." Now, that is highly irregular. Again, I've never seen that before. The police aren't there to say whether they're shocked or they support or they don't support protests. They're there to ensure that they happen without any criminal activity, so violence or whatever it is. They're not there to make a value judgment on the protest itself. But the day before, he made a value judgment, and then obviously sent his officers out to beat up and terrorize the protesters. Now, I've never seen that before in anything else. And we're talking about a group of people. We're talking about supporters of a group of people who have never hurt anyone. They've only hurt the machinery of war. They go in and dismantle drones in Elbit factories or throw a bit of paint on a plane. It's genuinely Orwellian, the times we are living in. And I know that's an overused phrase, but it is like 1984 when you have a government which is participating in a genocide in a direct way, and one of the worst crimes we've ever seen, and new levels of depravity being invented every day. When you have that government prescribing non-violent direct action protesters who are trying to stop that genocide as terrorists, that is a complete inversion of reality. That's an upside down world, and that's what we're living. And as you say, like everything has been exposed. Everything, not just the control that the Israelis have over our political system, also the role our media plays. The media has been exposed more than I've ever seen in my life, because they literally operate as an arm of the state. There's so little analysis or criticism of what's being said. The Orwellian situation I talk about is never problematized. Well, even the political class itself is exposed. Yesterday they voted on that prescription that I mentioned. I think 26 MPs of like 400 voted against it. So we're talking about a genocidal political class, a genocidal media class, and to be honest with you, it's always been implicit in the system. It's just never had been exposed like this, because it's not something that's just happened in the last 2 years. The seeds of it have been there for forever, and obviously British has a long history of supporting genocides during the time of the empire and massacred millions of people all around the world. But that in the modern era, they've managed to keep a mask on, or at least they've managed to not have to expose themselves like they're exposing themselves now. But for me, it's very important for all of us that we don't allow that mask to go back on, because there's a whole infrastructure of propaganda, PR, think tanks funded by native foreign ministries, newspapers funded by big corporations. There's a whole infrastructure. They got all the money, they got all the power. That their job is to keep that mask on, and they're going to be trying very, very hard to put that mask on again. But to be honest with you, I think if the genocide had lasted maybe 6 months, that might have been possible. But 2 years of us, all of us watching this every day, watching our government supporting it, watching our government arming it all, we're changed, we're altered for sure. I think everyone I speak to says that. And I don't think there's a way back, because firstly, we have to come to terms with the fact we live in genocidal society, but also we have to spend the rest of our days trying to bring the people to account who did this, because it's not rhetoric to say that if they are allowed to get away with it, we live in a jungle. Effectively, the red lines have all been crossed. Maybe they didn't exist before anyway, but they've definitely now all been crossed. Now, if we allow that to happen without any accountability or any justice, then the world we're creating is a monstrous one. And also, I think if we allow that to happen, and we don't use our whole force as humans to fight for that accountability, then we lose our humanity as well. Because one of the things that's been hard for me, and I'm sure you, is like how to not become numb to it. Because we've just every day I open my phone, literally every single day, and the first tweet I see is from one of the journalists in Gaza, and they say it's only 10 a.m. and they've already killed 70 people or more today. It was 129, and it's for 2 years, nearly 2 years, to wake up and see that. It's quite hard to be outraged by it and feel pain for it, but as soon as we stop feeling that pain, so I'm raging against normalization because they want us to think this is normal. But as you say, none of this is normal. This is horrific, and this is and we're part of it. So as soon as we allow it to become normalized, as soon as we become numb to it, I feel like we lose our humanity. But I also feel like we're all changed. I don't quite understand how we're changed. I'd be interested to hear what you think. But I think we're hardened, we're radicalized, and we're braver. But we also have a clearer understanding of who our enemy is, because I do feel more clarity now about the world and about where everyone stands because of this issue. Anyone who has had any defense, defended anything, of course, anyone who's armed it and supported it with the spy flights, whatever, even worse. But anyone who's who's supported it, anyone who stayed silent, there's no way back from that. You checked out during the worst crime of the modern era, the modern day Holocaust. There's no way back from that. You can't come back and claim that you're a moral human being or that you have any regard for human life or the world being a good place for us to live in if you checked out during that time. So we're in new territory. I feel like maybe the analog for this could some people would say is the 2003 war in Iraq. When I was politicized, I'm older than you, but I was 20 when that happened. And I remember being, there were realizations happening at the time. I was like, wow, our government doesn't mind lying to us to trick us into a war that killed up to 1 million people, maybe more, in Iraq, devastated the whole country. But it was different, it was different because it wasn't genocidal, although the figures were, and also the leaders, Bush and Blair, even then they thought they niced it up. Not that it was true, but they said we want to spread freedom and democracy. Now we've got these monstrous, basically Nazis in Tel Aviv who are going on TV and saying we're going to withdraw all water, food, electricity. We're dealing with human animals. You've got Netanyahu talk about Amalek. It's different. It's even though, yes, like I'm not defending Bush and Blair, but this is genocidal lunatics, and we've supported it all, backed it all. So I hope we can build something from this. I mean, the other side of it is that we just descend into that abyss further, that there's no way back. I don't know. I'd like to be optimistic, but I'm not actually that optimistic about it because it's been revealed that they don't mind doing it to the Palestinians, and if they'll do it to the Palestinians, they'll do it to us. So it's probably like those red lines have been crossed, and there'll be more. They'll just camp out on the other side of the red line rather than move back. But obviously, you can't think like you've got to have some hope, because otherwise you'd stop doing anything. So we've got to carry on.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point. I actually don't know what can be done. I just I feel the same way. I feel numb and I feel very angry, of course, when I get up every day and the same thing is happening. And I feel like for me, the doing media work is important, but I think we've gone past the point of just talking about this. There has to be action. But what kind of action do you take? What Palestine Action is doing is great, but even that's not enough. And it's coming to a point where, like, really the actions that need to take place are the types of actions that break the law. But the law no longer serves. us, it no longer serves human rights or justice or anything of that nature. You could argue it never has, but like you said, red lines have been crossed. You're correct to say that, there's little reason to be optimistic, and it's not because you're not an optimistic person. I share the same views, and people tell me all the time, "Oh, be more hopeful." If you are paying attention, there's nothing to be hopeful about. This is heading in a very bad direction. And I feel like, in a way, the world truly is ending. And we know that there are forces in America, in Israel, and even in the Muslim world that have this like eschatological end of times prophecy, these beliefs. And whether people believe in them or not, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you have people moving and acting in this way, and it has implications for everyone. So whether it means the literal end of the world or like a metaphorical end of civilization, I think there are bigger forces at play, and there's a lot of different aspects to how this is like manifesting itself. But essentially, I mean, it's not just what's happening in Gaza. This is like the ugliest manifestation, the revealing of this ugly face of empire. But we're seeing it like in Russia, Ukraine. We're seeing it manifest itself through like austerity measures. We're seeing domestic police brutalize their people. Climate change plays a role in this. Artificial intelligence is rapidly on its way. No one is paying attention to this. There is no regulation, and we're going to see more and more wealth accumulated to the very top. There'll be less and less jobs for people to have, and I think we're seeing the convergence of all these different forces come together that will just completely eliminate any type of facade of democracy or human rights or justice or anything of that nature. And I think there is a brewing divide between the people and the governments that claim to represent them, and the way the governments are choosing to respond is sending out people militarized and beating them up. And so what is happening essentially is the development of the environment of revolution, period. And the government is preparing to crush that, and they will likely succeed, because everyday people can't be expected, in a decentralized manner, to step out of their roles as regular human beings and become professionals to confront, those in power that for decades have been preparing and planning to maintain their control. So there's very little to be optimistic about. And I'm kind of going on a rant here, but that's how I see it. I see the convergence, of a lot of different forces, and I think it just gets worse from here.
I can say a counterpoint though. I mean, I do agree with you. Like they call it the Omni crisis, but I think, and you didn't even mention climate change or the privatized militaries as well, because this is another thing that I think is huge that is taking off, and we're still in the early stages of it. But the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is a good example of this. Like the American mercenaries that have. You talked about no regulation on AI and stuff, but there's no regulatory infrastructure for private security forces, and these are companies that operate all over the world, defending, paid for by states, but also paid for by corporations to defend their assets against dissidents or trade unionists in like Latin America or places. And that's growing at a massive rate. We did some work on this about how private military and security forces now outnumber police in most of the world. So when you talk about a whole transfer of power over to the private sector and privatized guns, effectively, that's a hugely problematic thing, because there's a whole history of political philosophy which says that the whole power of the state rests on the fact that it has a legitimate right to the resort to violence, and that's changed now. Like if that's privatized, then we literally the state is powerless, and in fact, and I think that has happened. But I would say there are places in the world where there is hope, like Latin America. So before Jeremy Corbyn, I'd never even bothered with British politics. It bored me to death, and it was full of evil people. It still is. But Jeremy Corbyn was a brief little break for that. But before that, I'd always gone to Latin America because I felt like when I was a younger man, I needed some hope. And actually, I still do. But like, what happened in Latin America under with Evo Morales, Hugo Chavez, Rafael Correa, Lula, like that. It was genuinely societies were transformed, and through democratic socialism. And you have people like Claudia Sheinbaum now in Mexico, who is doing amazing things in Mexico. Lula back in Brazil. You have Gustavo Petro, who's the president of Colombia, I mean, very, very good on the genocide. In fact, he invited Bob Villan, the guy from Glastonbury, to Colombia. So, but you have to understand that whenever their hope springs up, the empire activates to try and destroy it. And this is why I always not angry, but when people say another world is possible, not only is it possible, it would rise up organically. It has to keep being the empire has to work 24/7 to try and stop another world coming up, like whether it be like the coup in Chile in 1973, the coup in Bolivia in 2019, the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in Congo in 1961. If people are left alone and they're not and they're allowed to take control of their resources, allowed to run their countries and their governments in their own benefit, that's what they do. They generally, people do that. The empire works all the time to stop that happening. So I think that what we have to hope for, and I think there is hope in this, is the diminution in power in the United States, because this is it's an evil empire that has left so much of the world wrecked, and it is diminished. Its power is diminishing. The problem with the United States and its diminishing power is that a wounded tiger is more dangerous than a healthy tiger. And the other point is it's a completely unbalanced diminution of power. So economically, it's falling, but militarily, it's massively. It's still completely in a league of its own. So in terms of it spends $1 trillion. Half the congressional budget goes on the Pentagon. 800 bases around the world. And when you have a situation like that, where China's gaining economically and is much smarter economically, but it doesn't have that military prowess, doesn't have the bases. The problem when you hit with that is that your comparative advantage is your military. So the propensity is to use it to enforce your power.
Yeah,
so
it's use it or lose it.
Exactly.
For the US
every if you have a military that big, every nail, everything looks like if you've got a hammer that big, everything looks like a nail. You need to use it. And there's a famous quote from Colin Powell, I think, where he said, he's talking about something and someone says to him, like, what's the point in having this huge military if we don't use it? So there's a logic to that. But I do feel like it's waning, and also the PR is failing. Like the stuff I say about the US empire now, like, which people would have been like, what are you talking about? People are different after Gaza because they've seen the real depravity of the US political class, like, and it's probably people like us, we knew what the Democrats and Republicans are the same deal pretty much, but a lot of people didn't know that. The propaganda is heavy that Biden's the good guy, Trump's the bad guy in the liberal. And when you had Biden getting up for a year or more and defending everything Israel was doing, sending more weapons, young people especially are shocked, and their whole worldview has changed. Their whole view of America has changed. And it is true that this isn't the first awful crime America has committed. If you look at Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, they left those countries destroyed, and many other places as well. But this is the first time everyone's seen it on their phones. Young people have seen it, and they've had the chance to cross-reference what they're seeing with the propaganda about the land of the free and American exceptionalism, this city on a hill, all of that stuff. It's much easier now for young people to cross-reference that and to see that it's all bullshit, and that if the evidence was presented to even a 5-year-old, it could see that it's bullshit. But I think there is hope in that. But generally, I do agree with your analysis.
Yeah, I don't mean to sound too pessimistic.
No, you
but
should know. There's no point giving false hope. That's the important thing. It's like,
yeah.
So as Gramsci said, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. But it's quite hard in these trying days to abide that philosophy.
No, you're absolutely right. Don't want to give people false hope. Want to give them more of a realistic understanding of the world. So, Matt, I want to thank you for your time. It was an excellent conversation. I hope we can have you back on. I'm trying to develop a roster of consistent contributors to educate my audience. Obviously, it's good for me. I hope it's, you know, good for you as well, and
Yeah,
other
sure.
presenters that want to get out and get their work out. Where can people find more of your work? Do you have a Substack? Do you have a link that we can drive people to?
I'm working now with Palestine Deep Dive. It's not a new organization, but it's a new media organization which produces videos and articles and different things are focusing on Palestine, and it's Palestinian led. So our two main hosts are from Gaza, Ahmed Al Nouk, who you might know. He's a brilliant journalist, and Hala Hanina as well, who's another brilliant journalist. And yes, I'd say go to that, not just to check out me. You know, that the great thing about Palestine Deep Dive is it's all about amplifying Palestinian voices, which has been an amazing experience for me, because part of the obstacle that we have to understanding Palestine is that there's so many obstacles to that voice, the Palestinian voice, reaching at a mass audience in society, because you've got the smear campaigns run by the Israel lobby, you've got the racism of the elites in the countries, so and also, and it's dangerous. That's why they don't want them to be heard. So but the real story, the real truth about what's happening there is going to be told by the victims. It's not going to be told by the oppressors. So I'd say go and not just check out stuff I've done. In fact, don't bother with my stuff. Go and listen to all the amazing journalists, particularly from Gaza, and activists and victims of the genocide. There's a powerful back collection of interviews.
Excellent. So yeah, definitely check out Palestine Deep Dive, and also check out Matt's book, The Racket, and that will expose the American political and economic elite and the use of their money and weapons to engage in racketeering and domination all around the world. I appreciate you being here.
Much appreciated. Thanks for what you do.
Trust nothing. No law.